When Melody Taylor sneaks in late again, her husband Brock begins to suspect something is wrong in their marriage. After 8 happy years together, small changes in her behavior worry him. New fancy clothes, expensive perfume, secret text messages. One night, while Melody is in the shower, her phone lights up with a message that confirms Brock's worst fears. His wife is having an affair with her billionaire boss, Parker Reed. Heartbroken, Brock watches as Melody chooses a life of luxury with Parker over their simple but loving marriage. But instead of falling apart or seeking revenge like most people would, Brock has a different plan. A plan so unexpected that no one, especially Melody, could have seen it coming. What happens when a humble plumber competes with a powerful billionaire? For his wife's heart? Brock's response to betrayal will leave you speechless. Brock Taylor wiped his dirty hands on his work pants and checked his watch. Almost 6 o'clock. He'd been fixing pipes under Mrs. Wilson's sink for the past 3 hours, and his back ached. But the job was done, and Mrs. Wilson had paid him in cash with a $5 tip. Not bad for a Thursday. "You coming to Joe's for a beer?" asked his helper, Finn, as they loaded tools into Brock's white van. "Can't tonight," Brock said. "Melody should be home soon. Thought I'd surprise her with takeout from that Chinese place she likes." Finn nodded. "Tell her I said hi." Brock climbed into his van, thinking about his wife's smile. 8 years of marriage. And still, the thought of seeing Melody at the end of a long day made everything better. He stopped at Golden Dragon and ordered her favorites, Kung Pao chicken and vegetable dumplings. 20 minutes later, Brock pulled into the driveway of their small 2-bedroom house. The lights were off. He checked his phone. No messages from Melody. That was strange. She usually texted if she was going to be late. Brock balanced the food bags in one arm and unlocked the front door. The house was quiet and empty. He set the food on the kitchen counter and called Melody's phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," he said. "Just wondering when you'll be home. Got Chinese. Call me back." He changed out of his work clothes and took a quick shower. By 7:30, the food was cold, and there was still no word from Melody. Brock heated his portion in the microwave and ate alone at their small kitchen table, checking his phone every few minutes. At 8:15, he heard her key in the lock. Melody walked in, looking tired but somehow glowing. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a new blouse Brock didn't recognize. "Hey," she said, seeming surprised to see him at the table. "Sorry I'm late." Brock forced a smile. "Everything okay? I was worried. Just work stuff." Melody set her purse down and noticed the takeout containers. "Oh, you got Chinese?" "Yeah, 3 hours ago." She winced. "I'm sorry. I should have called. Mr. Reed needed the quarterly reports finished tonight, and then we all went for drinks to celebrate closing the Henderson deal." "Mr. Reed? You mean your boss's boss?" Brock asked. Melody nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. "Parker Reed himself. He's been coming down to our floor more often lately. Actually, he's not as scary as everyone says. He's pretty nice once you get to know him." Something in her voice made Brock look up sharply. She was smiling to herself, a private kind of smile. "Anyway," she continued, "I'm starving. Is there food left?" "In the fridge. Might need reheating." While Melody warmed up her dinner, Brock watched her. She seemed different somehow, more alive. She'd reapplied her lipstick recently. And was that new perfume? It smelled expensive. "How's the bathroom on Pine Street coming along?" she asked between bites. "Fixed the leak. Still need to replace the toilet tomorrow." Brock answered. "How's the exciting world of future tech?" Actually, something big happened today. Melody set down her fork. "Mr. Reed, Parker, asked if I'd be interested in becoming his personal assistant. It's a huge promotion, Brock. The pay is almost double what I make now." Brock's eyebrows shot up. "Wow, that's great. Congratulations. I'd have to work longer hours sometimes," she added quickly. "But it's worth it, right? We could finally fix the roof and maybe even take a real vacation next year." "Of course it's worth it," Brock said. "I'm happy for you." "Really?" Melody beamed at him, then pulled out her phone when it buzzed with a text. She read it and quickly typed a response, a small smile playing on her lips. "Work?" Brock asked. "Just Lisa asking about tomorrow," Melody said, putting the phone face down on the table. Later that night, while Melody was in the shower, her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Brock wouldn't normally look, but something felt off. The screen lit up with a message. "Parker, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Miss you already." Brock's stomach dropped. He stared at the message until the screen went dark again. When Melody came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to calm his racing heart. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his expression. Brock nodded. "Just tired. Long day." "Mine too," she said, but she was smiling that private smile again as she slipped into bed. In the darkness, Brock lay awake, listening to Melody's breathing. She fell asleep quickly, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. It was probably nothing, he told himself, a boss being friendly with his new assistant. That's all, but at 3 in the morning, Melody's phone lit up again on the nightstand. In the brief flash of light, Brock saw another message from Parker. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. The next morning, Brock left early for work. Melody was still asleep, her face peaceful. He noticed the diamond earrings on the nightstand, tiny, sparkling studs he'd never seen before. Earrings he could never afford on a plumber's salary. He kissed her forehead before leaving. She mumbled something in her sleep that sounded like "Park." Brock froze, then quietly walked out the door. As he drove to his first job of the day, Brock tried to convince himself he was imagining things. Their marriage was solid. 8 good years. Melody wouldn't throw that away. But the text message kept flashing in his mind. The new clothes, the late nights, the earrings, the perfect life they'd built together was showing its first crack. And Brock had no idea how to fix it. Parker Reed stepped out of his private elevator onto the 38th floor of the Future Tech Tower. Employees scattered like startled birds as he strode down the hallway, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished marble floor. At 38, Parker had built Future Tech from a small startup into a global tech empire worth billions. He was used to people jumping when he entered a room. But lately, only one person had been on his mind: Melody Taylor. He'd first noticed her 3 months ago at the company's spring party. While other employees tried too hard to impress him, Melody had been different. She'd been laughing with coworkers, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, completely unaware of his gaze. When someone spilled wine on her dress, she'd laughed it off instead of making a scene. Parker had been instantly intrigued. Women in his world rarely showed such genuine warmth. It had taken him just 2 weeks to arrange a transfer to have her working on his floor. Another week to learn she was married to a plumber named Brock. The marriage didn't concern Parker. Things like wedding vows were just obstacles, and Parker Reed had never met an obstacle he couldn't overcome. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," said his executive assistant Gregory, rushing to keep up with him. "You have a conference call with Tokyo at 9. and the board wants to discuss the quarterly reports before. Cancel the call. Reschedule the board, Parker said, not breaking stride. And tell Melody Taylor I need her in my office. Now. Gregory hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, sir. Parker entered his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything in the space was designed to impress. The modern art worth millions. The desk made from a single slab of rare marble. The view that reminded everyone just how far above them Parker Reed truly was. 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock at his door. Come in, Parker called, pretending to be deeply focused on his computer screen. Melody entered, wearing the blue blouse he'd sent to her anonymously last week through the company store. Good morning, Mr. Reed. You wanted to see me? Parker looked up and smiled. Melody, yes, please, sit down. He watched as she nervously took a seat across from his desk. She was beautiful in a natural, unpolished way that his usual circle of model-thin socialites lacked. There was something refreshingly real about her. How are you finding your new position? He asked. It's been wonderful, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Her voice had a slight tremor. Parker stood and walked to the window, motioning for her to join him. After a moment's hesitation, she did. Do you know what I see when I look out there, Melody? She shook her head. Possibilities, he said, standing close enough to smell her perfume, the Chanel he'd had delivered to her desk yesterday. I see a world full of things waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to reach for them. He turned to face her. The T. Henderson deal you helped with last week. Your attention to detail saved us from a costly mistake. Melody blushed. I just noticed the numbers didn't add up. Don't downplay your talents, Parker said. I reward excellence, which is why I'd like to offer you a new position as my personal assistant. Her eyes widened. Me? But I don't have the experience. Experience can be gained, Parker interrupted. Natural intelligence and instinct, those are rare. You have both. He named a salary that made her gasp. That's very generous, she stammered. I value loyalty above all things, Melody. He stepped closer. Those loyal to me never regret it. He watched her internal struggle play across her face. The temptation of the money, the excitement of working directly for him, and underneath, the unspoken awareness of what else might be developing between them. I'd love to accept, she finally said. Excellent, Parker smiled. We should celebrate. Dinner tonight. I know a place. Oh, I couldn't. It's a business. Dinner? He said smoothly. To discuss your new responsibilities. That evening, Parker sent his private car to pick her up 2 blocks from her house. He'd suggested the arrangement, so you don't have to explain work complications to your husband, and was pleased when she agreed. The restaurant was the most exclusive in the city. The maitre d' led them to a private room with a view of the skyline twinkling like stars. Parker ordered wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. To new beginnings, he toasted, watching her take in the luxury around them. As dinner progressed, Parker shared stories of his rise to success, carefully crafting the image of a self-made man who'd overcome tremendous odds. He omitted the investors he'd cheated, the competitors he'd crushed, the lives he'd ruined in his climb to the top. What about you, Melody? What dreams did you have before life got in the way? She looked down at her plate. I wanted to travel, see Paris, Rome. But then I met Brock, and we got married young, and dreams get put aside. Parker finished for her, but they don't have to stay buried. By dessert, he'd moved his chair closer to hers. When their hands touched reaching for the wine, he didn't pull away. Neither did she. In the car after dinner, Parker took her hand. I enjoy your company, Melody. I should get home, she whispered, but made no move to pull her hand away. Of course. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. Tomorrow, then. Over the next month, work dinners became more frequent, private lunches in his office, weekend calls that were less about business and more about getting to know each other. Parker sent gifts, small at first, then increasingly lavish. The earrings had been a test. When she wore them the next day, he knew she hadn't shown them to her husband. Parker wasn't used to waiting for what he wanted. But with Melody, the chase was part of the thrill. He saw her weakening, drawn to the world he could offer. So different from her modest life with the plumber. Tonight, they sat in his private penthouse after a late meeting, drinking champagne as the city glittered below. You're quiet, he said, refilling her glass. I was thinking about how different everything is now, she replied. 3 months ago, I was just another office worker. Now I'm here in a penthouse with you. Parker moved closer on the sofa. Do you ever think about what else could change? Where this could lead? Her eyes met his, filled with conflict. I'm married, Parker, to a man who can never give you this. He gestured around them. Who can never understand your potential the way I do. He leaned in, and this time when he kissed her, she didn't pull away. Her resistance crumbled like a sand castle against the tide of his persistence. Later, as his driver took her home, Parker smiled to himself. Melody Taylor was his newest acquisition, whether she fully realized it yet or not, and Parker Reed always took excellent care of his possessions, until he tired of them. Melody sat in the back of Parker's luxury car, watching city lights blur through the tinted windows. Her lips still tingled from his kisses. Her mind raced, with a mix of excitement and guilt, as the driver silently navigated the late-night streets toward her neighborhood. Stop here, please, she said, when they were still 2 blocks from her house. The driver nodded, understanding the routine by now. Melody checked her appearance in her compact mirror. She wiped away Parker's expensive cologne with a tissue and applied her normal drugstore perfume from her purse. She straightened her clothes and practiced her expression, tired from working late, not flushed from champagne and kisses. The cool night air helped clear her head as she walked the final blocks home. What was she doing? This wasn't supposed to happen. When Parker first showed interest, she'd told herself it was just friendly workplace attention. Then it became harmless, flirting. Now, she paused at the corner of her street, looking at her small house with its peeling paint and crooked mailbox. Brock had promised to fix that mailbox 3 months ago. He was always promising to fix things when he had time. Meanwhile, Parker made things happen with a single phone call. Melody took a deep breath and walked up the driveway. Through the window, she could see Brock asleep on the couch, TV still on. He'd waited up for her. Again. She quietly opened the door. Brock stirred, blinking awake. Hey, he said sleepily. How was work? Exhausting, she answered. Not exactly. A lie. Big project deadline. Sorry I'm so late. Brock nodded. There's leftover meatloaf in the fridge if you're hungry. I grabbed something at the office. She set down her purse, carefully hiding the designer label Parker had given her last week. You've been grabbing a lot of somethings at the office. Lately, Brock said, his voice carrying an edge she wasn't used to hearing. Melody felt her face grow hot. It's part of the job. I can't just walk out when things need to be done. I know. Brock ran his hand through his hair. I just miss you, that's all. The simple honesty in his voice made her stomach twist with guilt. I miss you too, she said quietly, and for a moment, she meant it. Later that night, Lying beside her sleeping husband, Melody's phone buzzed with a text. She knew who it was without looking. Parker never seemed to sleep. He'd be in his penthouse, working or planning his next business conquest, or thinking of her. Had a wonderful evening. Car will pick you up for breakfast meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m. Wear the blue dress. Melody typed back, "Can't do breakfast?" Brock will notice. The reply came quickly. "Tell him it's a work emergency. I need you." 3 simple words that made her pulse quicken. I need you. When was the last time Brock had said that? When was the last time anyone had made her feel so important? Okay. See you at 7, she replied, then deleted the entire conversation as she did every night. Morning came too quickly. Melody told Brock about an emergency client meeting while he was still half asleep. He mumbled something about working late himself and rolled over. The ease of the deception made her both relieved and sad. Parker was waiting in the car, looking impossibly handsome in a custom suit despite the early hour. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, handing her a coffee exactly the way she liked it. "Morning," she answered, accepting the coffee and his kiss. "Where are we really going? I can't be gone all day." "That depends." Parker's eyes sparkled with mischief. "How do you feel about Paris?" Melody laughed, then realized he wasn't joking when he handed her a passport. Her passport, which had been in her dresser drawer yesterday. "Parker, I can't just go to Paris. I have work." "And Brock, I am your work," Parker interrupted. "And as for Brock," he traced a finger down her cheek. "Tell him you're at a business conference. 3 days. My jet is waiting." "A conference? He'll never believe." "Then tell him the truth," Parker challenged. "Tell him you're with me." Melody fell silent, the choice hanging between them. She thought of her conversation with Brock last night, the hurt in his eyes, the distance growing between them. Then she thought of Paris, of seeing the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, all the places she'd dreamed of visiting. With Parker, who made impossible things happen with a snap of his fingers. 3 days, she finally said, "but I need to call work." Parker smiled. "Already handled. Your assistant's assistant has cleared your schedule." 2 hours later, they were airborne in Parker's private jet. Melody sent Brock a text about an emergency conference in Chicago. The lie came easier this time. Paris, Parker booked the presidential suite at a hotel overlooking the Seine. He bought her a new wardrobe from designers whose names she'd only seen in magazines. They dined at restaurants where chefs prepared food just for them, drank wine older than both of them combined, and walked hand in hand along moonlit streets. At night, in Parker's arms, Melody tried not to think of Brock alone in their small house. She pushed the guilt away by reminding herself this was temporary, just a dream vacation, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. On their last evening, at a private table in the Eiffel Tower restaurant, Parker presented her with a diamond bracelet that caught the light in dazzling rainbow patterns. "Parker, it's too much," she whispered as he clasped it around her wrist. "Nothing is too much for you," he said, his eyes intense. "I'm falling in love with you, Melody." The words hung in the air between them. Words that should have made her heart soar, but instead made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "What happens when we go back?" she asked. "That's up to you," Parker replied. "But I think you've seen now what life could be like. With me, you can have everything you've ever wanted." Melody looked down at the bracelet, then out at the glittering Paris skyline. 2 worlds, 2 lives. The humble, comfortable love she'd built with Brock versus the exciting, luxurious future Parker offered. As the city of lights sparkled below, Melody felt the weight of her double life pressing down on her. Soon, she would have to choose. Brock stared at the bank statement, reading the numbers again to make sure he wasn't seeing things. A deposit of $5,000 had appeared in their joint checking account last week. Another $3,500 the week before. He flipped through the pages, finding similar deposits going back 2 months. He and Melody had always shared their finances. They'd opened this account right after getting married, when they were both making just enough to scrape by. Back then, they'd celebrated when they had an extra $100 at the end of the month. Now there were thousands appearing regularly, and Melody hadn't mentioned a word. Brock looked around their small kitchen, noting the new coffee maker, the fancy olive oil, the expensive wine in the rack. Small changes that had been happening so gradually he'd barely noticed. Melody had said they were little splurges she deserved after her promotion. The promotion, working directly for Parker Reed, late nights, weekend conferences. The pieces were starting to form a picture Brock didn't want to see. He set the bank statement aside when he heard Melody's key in the door. She'd been in Chicago for 3 days. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, as she wheeled in a new suitcase Brock had never seen before. "Hey, you're home early," she said, sounding a little too surprised. Finished the Johnston bathroom remodel ahead of schedule. Brock stood up, trying to read her expression. "How was Chicago?" "Exhausting. Back-to-back meetings." She sat down, her purse, and gave him a quick peck on the cheek. "I need a shower." As she turned to go, Brock noticed something sparkling on her wrist. "What's that?" Melody froze. "What's what?" "On your wrist." She looked down, as if just noticing the diamond bracelet herself. "Oh, this? It's nothing. Just costume jewelry I picked up at a little shop near the hotel. Thought it was fun." The lie hung in the air between them. Even from where he stood, Brocky could tell those weren't fake diamonds. "Must have been some shop," he said quietly. "Looks real," Melody laughed, a high, nervous sound. "As if I could afford real diamonds. You know how I love a good bargain." Brock nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd installed enough bathroom fixtures in wealthy homes to know what real diamonds looked like. That bracelet probably cost more than he made in 6 months. "I'm going to shower," Melody said again, disappearing down the hallway. While the water ran, Brock sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing. He didn't want to believe what the evidence was telling him. There had to be another explanation. He'd heard Melody's phone buzz in her purse. He'd never checked her phone before. It felt like a violation of trust, but right now, he needed to know if his worst fears were true. The screen showed a text from PR. "Miss you already. Let me know when you can get away again. The jet's standing by whenever you want it." Jet? Chicago didn't require a private jet. Brock felt sick. He scrolled up through the messages, his hands shaking. "The blue looks stunning on you. Keep it on. Tonight. Nothing else. Tell him whatever you need to. I want you here. Meeting the board for dinner. Wear the diamonds. I like knowing what's mine." Brock put the phone down, feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. He heard the shower stop. Quickly, he returned the phone to Melody's purse and went to the living room, turning on the TV to have something, anything, to focus on, besides the pain tearing through his chest. When Melody came out wrapped in a towel, her hair wet, and the bracelet noticeably absent, Brock pretended to be engrossed in a basketball game. "I was thinking we could order pizza tonight," she said. "Catch up." "Sure," Brock replied, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "Whatever you want." That night, he lay awake beside his wife, listening to her breathing. The woman he'd loved for 8 years now felt like a stranger. Sleep wouldn't come, so he got up early and headed to work, leaving a note saying he had an emergency call. Instead, he drove around aimlessly, finally stopping at Zach's construction site. His best friend took one look at his face and told his crew he was taking a break. "What's wrong, man? You look like hell," Zach said, handing Brock a coffee from the site's food truck. "It's Melody," Brock said, the words feeling like rocks in his throat. "I think she's having an affair." Saying it out loud made it more real. Brock explained about the money, the bracelet, the text messages. Zach listened without interrupting, his face growing more concerned with each detail. "With her boss? This Parker guy?" Zach finally asked. Brock nodded. "He's not just her boss. He owns the whole company. He's worth billions." "Jesus, Brock. Have you confronted her?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure." Brock stared at his coffee. "Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe there's an explanation." Zach sighed. "Look, I've known you both since high school. Melody's always been straight as an arrow. But it doesn't sound good, man." "I need to know for sure," Brock said. "I need to see it with my own eyes." That afternoon, Brock did something he'd never done before. He called his afternoon appointments and rescheduled them. Then he drove to the gleaming Future Tech Tower downtown, parking across the street. He felt ridiculous, like a character in some bad movie, but he had to know the truth. At 5 o'clock, employees began streaming out of the building. Brock watched for Melody's familiar figure, but she didn't appear. 6 o'clock came and went. Then 7. The flow of people had dwindled to almost nothing. Brock was about to give up when a sleek black car pulled up to the front entrance. A minute later, Melody walked out of the building accompanied by a tall, handsome man in an expensive suit. Even from a distance, Brock could see the man's hand resting possessively on the small of Melody's back. They paused at the car, and the man, Parker Reed, Brock assumed, said something that made Melody laugh. Then, right there on the public sidewalk, Parker pulled her close and kissed her. Not a friendly kiss, not a professional goodbye. A lover's kiss that Melody returned with equal passion. Brock felt his world collapse around him. He'd been hoping, praying for some innocent explanation. Now, there was no doubt left. The car door opened. Parker said something to Melody, who hesitated, then shook her head. She kissed him one more time before he got into the car, alone. As the car pulled away, Melody stood watching it for a moment, then turned and went back into the building. Brock sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. His wife of 8 years was in love with another man, a billionaire who could give her everything Brock couldn't. He started his van and drove home in a daze. By the time he pulled into his driveway, a strange calm had settled over him. The uncertainty had been eating him alive. Now at least he knew. Inside, he pulled out the photo album from their wedding. Page after page of smiling faces. Promises of forever. He and Melody, dancing under strings of lights, looking at each other like nothing else in the world mattered. What had changed? When had money and status become more important than the life they'd built together? As headlights swept across the living room window, Brock closed the album. Melody's key turned in the lock. She walked in, looking tired but beautiful. The sight of her still made his heart ache, even now. "Hey," she said, setting down her purse. "You're home late." "So are you," Brock replied, his voice steady. "Hard day at work?" "The usual." Melody avoided his eyes. "I'm going to make some tea. Want some?" "No thanks." Brock took a deep breath. "I went by your office today." Melody froze, her back to him. "Oh? Yeah, around 7. He watched her shoulders tense. "Thought I'd surprise you with dinner." She turned slowly, her face carefully blank. "You should have called first. I was in a meeting." "With Parker Reed?" The color drained from Melody's face. "Brock, I saw you, Melody." His voice cracked. "I saw you with him, outside your building." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "What exactly do you think you saw?" The denial in her voice sparked something in Brock. He pulled out his phone, showing her the photos he'd taken from across the street. Melody and Parker, kissing beside the black car. "I saw my wife kissing another man," he said. "I saw the end of my marriage." Melody stared at the phone in Brock's hand, her face pale in the dim light of their living room. The photo showed exactly what Brock had described. Her and Parker locked in an intimate kiss beside his car. "It's not what it looks like," she said automatically. Brock's laugh was hollow. "Really? That's what you're going with? The oldest line in the book?" Melody set down her purse with shaking hands. "Okay, it is what it looks like, but it's complicated." "Complicated?" Brock's voice rose. "What's complicated about breaking our wedding vows? About lying to my face for months?" "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Melody said, sinking onto the couch. "It just did." "Things like this don't just happen, Melody. You made choices. Over and over again." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. The Chi-E simple gold band Brock had saved for months to buy looked plain next to the sparkle of her diamond bracelet, which she'd put back on after her shower. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "I made choices, bad ones." Brock sat in the chair across from her, keeping his distance. "How long?" "What? How long has this been going on?" "The truth, Melody. I deserve at least that." She swallowed hard. "About 3 months since the promotion." 3 months. Brock shook his head, trying to process it. "And the money in our account? The bracelet? The trips that weren't really to Chicago?" "Paris," Melody whispered. "We went to Paris." The words hit Brock like a physical blow. Paris. Melody had always dreamed of seeing Paris. They'd talked about saving up for their 10th anniversary, but it had seemed so far away, so impossible on their budget. "He took you to Paris on his private jet," Brock said, remembering the text message. "Must be nice." "It was beautiful," Melody admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "But I felt guilty the whole time." "Not guilty enough to stop," Brock pointed out. "Not guilty enough to tell me the truth." Melody wiped her eyes. "I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how." "How about Brock? I'm having an affair with my billionaire boss? Simple enough." "It's not just an affair." Melody stood up suddenly. "I think I'm in love with him." The room went silent. Brock felt as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He'd suspected the affair, but hearing that she loved Parker was something else entirely. "You think you're in love with him?" Brock repeated slowly. "After 8 years with me, 3 months with him, and you're in love." "He sees something in me that no one else ever has," Melody said. "He believes in my potential. He wants to give me the world." "And I don't?" Brock's voice cracked. "I've supported every dream you've ever had. I worked double shifts so you could finish college. I've loved you through everything." "I know you have." Melody's voice softened. "But be honest, Brock. We've been stuck in the same place for years. Same house, same jobs, same everything. Parker offers something different." "Different," Brock echoed. "You mean richer?" "That's not fair." "No. What's not fair is throwing away 8 years of marriage for a guy who treats you like his newest toy." Melody's eyes flashed. You don't know him. I know his type, Brock said. Guys who think they can buy anything or anyone. Do you really think you're the first assistant he's seduced? It's not like that, Melody insisted. He loves me. So, what happens now? Brock asked, suddenly feeling exhausted. You're here, telling me you love another man. Where does that leave us? Melody hesitated. Parker wants me to move in with him. Of course he does. He asked me to leave you, she continued, her voice small. He says we could travel, see the world. I could stop working, focus on what I really want to do with my life. Brock laughed bitterly. Sounds like a dream come true. What's stopping? You! Melody looked at him, tears streaming down her face. 8 years of memories, the life we built. You. If I matter so much, why are we having this conversation? Brock stood up, pacing the small living room. Why did you sleep with him in the first place? I don't know, Melody whispered. It all happened so fast. The attention, the gifts, the way he looked at me. I got caught up in it. And now? Now I'm confused. She looked around their modest home. I love you, Brock. I always have. But with Parker, I feel alive in a way I never have before. He shows me possibilities I never even dreamed of. And I just show you pipe fittings and unpaid bills, Brock said. That's not what I meant. Brock stopped pacing and faced her. Did our marriage mean nothing? Were you unhappy all this time and I just didn't see it? No! Melody stood up, moving toward him. We were happy, are happy. It's just not enough, Brock finished. Not compared to private jets and diamond bracelets. Melody reached for his hand, but Brock stepped back. I need some time to think, she said. This is all happening so fast. Take all the time you need, Brock said, his voice flat. Just not here. Melody stared at him. What? I can't watch you pack for your billionaire boyfriend in our bedroom, Brock said. I can't lie next to you knowing you're thinking about him. Either choose our marriage and end things with him, or go to him now. You're asking me to decide right this minute? I'm asking you to be honest. With yourself and with me, Brock said. If you need to think about it, you've already made your choice. Melody was silent for a long moment. Then she walked to their bedroom without a word. Brock heard drawers opening, closet doors sliding. 10 minutes later, she emerged with a small suitcase. I'll stay at a hotel tonight, she said, her voice shaking. I just need some space to figure things out. Brock didn't respond. This doesn't mean I'm choosing him, Melody added quickly. I just need time to think clearly, away from both of you. Do whatever you need to do, Brock said, turning away. Melody hesitated by the door. I'll call you tomorrow? Brock nodded, not trusting himself to speak. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. After the door closed behind her, Brock sat alone in the silence of their home. The walls seemed to press in around him, filled with photos and memories of their life together, a life that might be over. He picked up his phone to call Zach, then set it down again. There was nothing anyone could say to make this better. His wife was gone, choosing a hotel room over their marriage. As the night grew darker, Brock wondered if she was calling Parker right now, if her hotel room was actually the billionaire's penthouse, if the life they'd built together was already beyond saving. 3 days after Melody left, Brock still hadn't gone back to work. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from clients and his boss, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. What would he say? Sorry, I can't fix your toilet. My wife left me for a billionaire, Empty beer cans littered the coffee table. Dishes piled up in the sink. Brock moved between the couch and the bedroom like a ghost, sleeping at odd hours and staring at the ceiling the rest of the time. Melody had texted twice, once to say she was safe, another time asking if they could talk soon. Brock hadn't responded. What was there to say? On the fourth day, someone pounded on the front door. Brock ignored it. The pounding continued, followed by Zach's voice. "Brock, open up, man! I know you're in there." More pounding. "I'll break this door down if I have to. Don't think I won't." Brock knew his friend wasn't bluffing. Zach had once kicked in the bathroom door at a party when someone passed out inside. With a groan, Brock dragged himself off the couch and shuffled to the door. Zach's concerned expression quickly turned to shock when he saw Brock. "Jesus, man, you look like hell." "Thanks," Brock muttered, stepping aside to let Zach in. Zach surveyed the mess of the living room, the takeout containers, the beer cans. "When's the last time you showered?" Brock shrugged. "What day is it?" "Friday." "Then Monday? Maybe Sunday?" Zach shook his head. "This stops now. Go shower while I clean this place up." "Don't bother," Brock said, sinking back onto the couch. "What's the point?" "The point is, you're still alive, even if you don't feel like it." Zach started gathering beer cans. "Where's Melody?" "Don't know. Don't care." "Liar." Brock glared at his friend. "She left me, Zach. For a guy worth billions. What am I supposed to do with that?" "First, shower. Then eat something that wasn't delivered in a box." Zach pulled Brock to his feet. "After that, we figure out the rest." Too exhausted to argue, Brock shuffled to the bathroom. The hot water brought him back to life a little. He shaved off his 4-day beard and put on clean clothes. When he came out, the living room was transformed. The trash was gone, dishes washed, windows open to let in fresh air. Zach was in the kitchen making sandwiches. "Eat," he ordered, sliding a plate toward Brock. Brock took a bite, suddenly realizing how hungry he was. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Zach spoke again. "Your boss called me. You've missed 6 jobs this week. I'll call him tomorrow." "You'd better. He's holding your job, but not forever." Zach hesitated. "Have you talked to Melody?" Brock shook his head. "What's there to say?" "Plenty," Zach said. "Like whether you're fighting for your marriage or calling it quits. She's the one who left. And you're the one hiding in your house, drowning in beer cans." Zach's voice softened. "Look, I'm not saying what she did wasn't wrong. It was. But marriages have survived worse." "Have they?" Brock asked bitterly. "Have they survived a wife falling in love with someone else? Someone who can give her everything I can't?" "Money isn't everything. Easy for you to say. You didn't see her face when she talked about him." Brock pushed his plate away. "She glowed, Zach, like she used to glow when we first got together." Zach was quiet for a moment. "So what's your plan? Sit here until you lose your job and your house too?" "I don't have a plan," Brock admitted. "I wake up and it hits me all over again. My wife is gone. My marriage is over. Maybe, maybe not." Zach opened the fridge and frowned at the empty shelves. "But either way, you can't stay in limbo. You need to decide if you want to fight for her or let her go." "How do I compete with a billionaire?" Brock asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him. "He can give her Paris. I can barely afford to fix our leaky roof." "You don't compete. On his terms," Zach said. "That's a game you'll always lose." "Then how?" "By remembering who you are. The guy she fell in love with 8 years ago." Zach grabbed his keys. "Come on, we're going grocery shopping, and then you're calling your boss." After Zach left that evening, Brock sat alone in his clean house, feeling slightly more human. He'd called his boss, apologized, and promised to be back on Monday. He'd eaten real food and thrown out the remaining beer. But the emptiness remained. Every corner of the house reminded him of Melody, her favorite coffee mug, the blanket she liked to curl up under while watching TV, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in their bedroom. Brock picked up his phone and stared at Melody's last text. "Can we talk soon?" His thumb hovered over the keyboard. What would he say? That he missed her? That he was angry? That he wanted her back even after what she'd done? All of it was true. And that was the problem. His emotions were a tangled mess he couldn't sort through. With a sigh, Brock set the phone down without responding. Instead, he pulled out a notebook and started writing. All his thoughts, his pain, his questions. By midnight, he'd filled 10 pages. The writing didn't fix anything, but it cleared his head enough to see one truth. He couldn't go on like this. Either he had to fight for his marriage or accept that it was over and start rebuilding his life. The question was, which path to take? As he finally drifted off to sleep, Brock realized something else. For the first time in their relationship, the choice wasn't just Melody's. It was his, too. He could decide what he deserved, what he was willing to accept. That small realization didn't heal the wound of her betrayal, but it was a first step away from rock bottom. Melody stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of Parker's penthouse. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and strange. Her face, but framed by an expensive haircut she'd gotten yesterday at Parker's insistence. "You need a style that suits your new life," he'd said. Her new life. The words still felt unreal, like she was playing a part in someone else's story. It had been a week since she'd left Brock. She'd spent 2 nights at a hotel before Parker convinced her to move into his penthouse temporarily, while she figured things out. Temporary had quickly started feeling permanent as Parker's staff moved her few belongings into his massive closet, her clothes looking plain next to his designer wardrobe. "Are you ready?" Parker called from the bedroom. "The car is waiting." "Just a minute," Melody replied, applying the lipstick Parker had chosen for her, a shade bolder than she would have picked herself. Tonight was a dinner party with Parker's investor friends, her first official appearance as his girlfriend. The thought made her stomach clench with nerves. She stepped out of the bathroom in the black dress Parker had bought her. It was beautiful, but so tight she could barely breathe. Parker looked up from his phone, his eyes sweeping over her critically. "The earrings I gave you would look better with that neckline, the ones on the dresser." Melody touched the simple pearl earrings she was wearing, a gift from Brock on their 5th anniversary. "I like these." Parker's expression hardened slightly. "The diamonds will make a better impression." These people notice details. Without waiting for her response, he picked up the diamond earrings and handed them to her. Melody hesitated, then removed Brock's pearls and put on Parker's diamonds. "Much better," Parker said, already turning away to check his watch. "Let's go. I don't like to be late." In the elevator down to the waiting car, Parker briefed her. "The Carmichaels are my most important investors. Richard likes to think he knows wine, so compliment whatever he serves. His wife Diane collects art. She'll probably show you her latest acquisition. Act impressed." Melody nodded, trying to remember all his instructions. "And try not to mention your old life," Parker added as the elevator doors opened. "These people won't understand why I'm with someone from your background unless they see you as exceptional." The comment stung, but Melody pushed the feeling aside. Parker was just helping her fit into his world. That's what she wanted, wasn't it? The dinner party was at a mansion overlooking the city. As they entered, Melody felt painfully aware of how everyone was evaluating her. The women with cool assessment, the men with barely concealed appraisal. "Parker, darling." A thin woman with overly tightened skin air-kissed Parker's cheeks. "And this must be your new friend." "Diane, meet Melody Taylor," Parker said. "Melody, Diane Carmichael, our hostess." Melody extended her hand. "Lovely to meet you. Your home is beautiful." Diane barely touched Melody's fingers before turning back to Parker. "Richard is dying to show you the new wine cellar. You men can go play while I introduce Melody to everyone." As Parker disappeared with Richard, Diane guided Melody toward a group of women sipping champagne. "So, Parker tells us you were his assistant?" The way she said "assistant" made it sound like a disease. "I still am," Melody clarified. "Professionally, our relationship is unchanged." The women exchanged glances. "How modern," one of them said with a tight smile. "Though I imagine the HR department must be having fits." "Parker owns the company," another woman pointed out. "He can do whatever he wants." "Or whoever," a third added under her breath, causing the others to titter with laughter. Melody's cheeks burned. "Excuse me, I need to find the ladies' room." In the marble bathroom, Melody gripped the edge of the sink, breathing deeply. The women's thinly veiled contempt was suffocating. She checked her phone. No response from Brock to her texts. The silence from him hurt more than she'd expected. When she returned to the party, she found Parker holding court among a group of men, all laughing loudly. "There she is," Parker said, pulling her against his side possessively. "Gentlemen, this is Melody. Parker was just telling us how he stole you away from accounting," one man said. "I wasn't in accounting," Melody corrected. "I was an executive assistant in marketing." Parker's arm tightened around her waist. Melody was wasted in her old position. "I recognized her potential immediately." The men chuckled knowingly. "I'll bet you did," one said, winking at Parker. "Some potential is impossible to overlook," another added, his eyes traveling over Melody's body. Parker laughed along with them. Melody stiffened, waiting for him to defend her, to clarify that she was more than just a pretty conquest. Instead, he steered the conversation to a business deal, still holding her close, but effectively silencing her. Throughout dinner, Melody sat quietly as the conversation flowed around her. Whenever she tried to join in, Parker would subtly redirect things or speak over her. By dessert, she felt completely invisible. On the ride home, Melody stared out the window of Parker's car, trying to sort through her feelings. "You were quiet tonight," Parker observed. "Your friends made it clear what they think of me," Melody said. "That I'm just your latest trophy." Parker frowned. "They're important business connections. Their opinion of my personal life doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Melody turned to face him. "You didn't correct them. You didn't defend me." "Defend you from what? It's no secret how we met. They treated me like I'm nothing but your plaything, and you laughed along with them." Parker's expression cooled. "You're being oversensitive. This is a different world from what you're used to. You need to develop a thicker skin." "Is that how you see me too? As just another acquisition?" "Don't be ridiculous." Parker reached for her hand. "I care about you, but you need to understand how things work at this level. Appearances matter. The right connections matter. And my feelings don't? Of course they do." Parker sighed. "Look, I'm trying to help you fit into my world. You said you wanted that." Melody fell silent. Had she said that? Or had Parker just assumed it? As they rode the private elevator up to the penthouse, Melody thought about Brock, how he'd always valued her opinions, how he'd never made her feel small. And for the first time since she'd left him, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Monday morning arrived with a harsh alarm. Brock opened his eyes, momentarily disoriented until reality crashed back. Melody was gone. But today was different. Today, he was going back to work. In the shower, Brock let the hot water wash over him as he organized his thoughts. Last night's realization had settled into a kind of clarity. He couldn't control what Melody did, but he could control his own actions, and wallowing in self-pity wasn't helping anyone. He dressed in his work uniform, blue shirt with Taylor Plumbing embroidered on the pocket, khaki pants, work boots. His boss, Frank, had been understanding when Brock called yesterday, only saying, "Personal problems happen to everyone. Just don't make a habit of disappearing." At the shop, Frank handed him a stack of work orders. "Good to have you back, Taylor. Mrs. Peterson's been calling every day about her bathtub." "I'll head there first," Brock said, grateful for the normal routine. By lunchtime, he'd fixed Mrs. Peterson's bathtub and unclogged 2 drains. The physical work felt good, giving his hands something to do while his mind worked through bigger problems. During his lunch break, sitting in his van with a sandwich, Brock made a list in his notepad. Things I can change: my skills, get contractor's license, my income, more jobs, better jobs, my future. What do I really want? Things I can't change: Melody's feelings, Parker's money. The past, seeing it written down, made things clearer. Competing with Parker's wealth was pointless, but maybe he didn't need to compete at all. Maybe he needed a different approach entirely. That afternoon, between jobs, Brock stopped at the community college. The admissions counselor, a middle-aged woman named Rita, looked surprised when he walked in still wearing his work clothes. "I want information about getting a contractor's license," Brock explained. "And maybe some business classes." Rita smiled. "We can help with both. Night classes start next week." By the time Brock left, he had registered for business fundamentals and construction management courses. The tuition wasn't cheap, but he had some savings, and Frank had always said he'd pay for classes that improved job skills. At his final job of the day, fixing a wealthy family's kitchen sink, Brock found himself paying more attention to the house itself: the custom cabinets, the stone countertops, the detailed trim work. He'd been in hundreds of beautiful homes, but had never really thought about building them, just fixing the plumbing inside them. "You did a wonderful job," the homeowner, Mrs. Vaughn, said as she wrote him a check. "So quick and clean. Our last plumber left a mess everywhere." "I believe in doing things right," Brock replied. Mrs. Vaughn tilted her head. "Are you just a plumber?" "My husband is looking for someone to renovate our guest bathroom. Nothing fancy, just new tile and fixtures." Just a plumber. The words might have stung a week ago, but today, Brock saw opportunity. "Actually, I'm working on my contractor's license," he said. "I'd be happy to look at your bathroom, though I'd need to bring in a licensed contractor to oversee the work until I get my license." "That sounds perfect," Mrs. Vaughn beamed. "Much better than those big companies that charge a fortune. Can you come by this weekend to discuss it?" Driving home, Brock felt something he hadn't experienced in days: purpose. The beginnings of a plan were taking shape. Not just a plan to win Melody back, but a plan for himself, regardless of what happened with his marriage. At home, the empty house no longer felt quite so hollow. Brock spread his college materials across the kitchen table, then ordered a stack of books on contracting and small business management. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. His phone buzzed with a text from Melody. "Can we meet sometime this week?" We need to talk." Brock stared at the message. A week ago, he'd been desperate to hear from her. Now, he felt strangely calm. Whatever Melody had to say, he would listen. But he would also have something to say himself. "Thursday evening works. 7 p.m. at Joe's Diner?" he replied. Her response came quickly. "I'll be there. Thank you, Brock." Setting his phone aside, Brock returned to his planning. By midnight, he had sketched out a rough business plan for Taylor Contracting and Renovation. The name had a good ring to it. The next morning, Brock called Zach before work. "I need a favor," he said when his friend answered. "Can you be the licensed contractor for a bathroom renovation? I'll do the work, but I need someone with a license to oversee it." "You're taking on renovation work?" Zach sounded surprised. "Since when?" "Since now," Brock answered. "I'm getting my contractor's license, taking classes and everything." "Whoa, that's unexpected." Zach paused. "What about Melody?" "I'm meeting her tomorrow. But this isn't about her, not entirely. It's about what I want for my future, with or without her." Zach whistled. "That's the most positive thing I've heard you say in a long time. Count me in." Throughout the week, between regular plumbing jobs, Brock worked on his plan. He created a logo for his new business. He researched suppliers who could offer better prices on materials. He even set up a business bank account, separate from his personal finances. When Thursday evening arrived, Brock found himself oddly nervous as he drove to Joe's Diner. It would be the first time he'd seen Melody since she walked out with her suitcase. He wondered if she'd look different, if living with a billionaire had already changed her in visible ways. He arrived early and chose a booth at the back. Joe's was their place, a simple diner where they'd had countless meals together over the years. Brock remembered their first date here, Melody laughing as he told a story about a disaster plumbing job. At exactly 7, the bell above the door jingled. Brock looked up to see Melody standing in the entrance, scanning the diner. His heart lurched painfully at the sight of her. She was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No visible signs of her new luxurious lifestyle, except perhaps the diamond bracelet still gleaming on her wrist. When she spotted him, her face softened with relief. She made her way to the booth and slid in across from him. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Brock replied, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. An awkward silence stretched between them until the waitress came for their orders. They both asked for coffee, falling back on the safe familiarity of routine. "You look good," Melody finally said. "Better than I expected." "I went back to work," Brock said. "Been keeping busy." "I'm glad." She fidgeted with her bracelet. "I wasn't. Sure you'd agree to meet me." "Why wouldn't I?" Brock asked. "We're still married last I checked." Melody winced at that. "That's part of what I wanted to talk about." Brock braced himself. This was it. She was going to ask for a divorce. He'd prepared himself for this possibility, but the reality still felt like a punch to the gut. "Parker wants me to move to his beach house for the summer," she said instead. "He has a place in the Hamptons. But I told him I needed to sort things out with you first." "Sort things out," Brock repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" Melody looked down at her coffee. "I don't know. That's the truth, Brock. I'm confused. When I'm with Parker, everything seems exciting and full of possibility. But then what? Then I think about us, about our history, about how different things are with him." She looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "His friends treat me like I'm just a trophy, like I'm nothing. You never made me feel that way." Brock absorbed this information silently, noting the crack in the perfect facade of her new life. Part of him wanted to press the advantage, to point out all the ways Parker was wrong for her. But another part, the part that had been planning and thinking clearly all week, knew that wouldn't work. "I've been making some changes," he said instead, pulling out his notebook. "Starting my own contracting business, taking classes, planning for the future." Melody looked surprised as he showed her his sketches and plans. Wow, Brock, this is impressive. When did you decide to do all this?" "After you left." Brock closed the notebook. "I realized I had two choices: fall apart or build something new. I'm choosing to build." "I never knew you wanted to be a contractor." "There's a lot we haven't talked about lately," Brock said. "Dreams, plans, the future. We got comfortable. Or maybe just stuck." Melody nodded slowly. "That's fair." "So what happens now?" Brock asked. "Are you asking for a divorce so you can go to the Hamptons with your billionaire?" "No," Melody said quickly. "I mean, I don't know. I need more time to figure things out." Brock studied her face, the face he'd loved for so long. He could see her confusion, her genuine struggle, and despite everything, he still loved her. But he also valued himself more than he had a week ago. "Take the time you need," he said finally. "I'll be here, building my business, my future. With or without you, Melody. The choice is yours." As they parted in the parking lot, the air between them felt charged with unspoken words. Melody hesitated, then quickly hugged him before hurrying to her car. A new luxury model Brock had never seen before. Watching her drive away, Brock felt strangely at peace. For the first time since she'd left, he wasn't just reacting to her choices. He was making his own. "Goodness, that pipe is in worse shape than I thought," Brock muttered, shining his flashlight into the dark space beneath an ancient marble sink. He was in the master bathroom of one of the city's oldest mansions, a sprawling estate in the wealthy North Side. "Can you fix it?" asked a voice behind him. Brock backed out from under the sink to face the homeowner, Vera Hollingsworth. She was in her 70s, with silver hair styled in an elegant bob and eyes that missed nothing. "Yes, ma'am, but it'll take more work than I estimated. The whole section needs replacing, not just patching." Vera nodded. "Do whatever is necessary. This house has stood for 100 years. I'd like it to last another 100. As Brock worked, Vera brought him iced tea and sat nearby, watching with interest. Unlike most wealthy clients who disappeared while the help worked, she seemed genuinely curious about what he was doing. "You're very meticulous," she observed. "Most workmen rush through, especially when charging by the hour." "I believe in doing things right the first time," Brock replied, carefully fitting the new pipes. "Together saves trouble down the road. A rare quality these days." Vera sipped her tea. "How long have you been a plumber, Mr. Taylor?" "Brock, please. And about 10 years now." "You enjoy it?" The question caught Brock off guard. Most people assumed no one could possibly enjoy plumbing. "I like solving problems," he said after a moment, "figuring out what's wrong and making it right. But actually, I'm working on becoming a contractor, taking classes at night, expanding your horizons." "Admirable." They chatted as Brock worked, and he found himself telling Vera about his plans for Taylor contracting and renovation. She asked smart questions about his business model and marketing strategy, questions that made him realize he still had lots to figure out. "You know, my late husband built his construction company from nothing," Vera said. "Started with just a toolbox and an old truck. By the time he passed, Hollingsworth Construction had built half the office towers downtown." "Hollingsworth Construction?" Brock looked up in surprise. They're one of the biggest firms in the city. Vera smiled. Indeed. Thomas would be pleased to hear you say so. He never forgot his humble beginnings, though. Always said the secret to his success was honesty and hard work. As Brock packed up his tools, Vera insisted he join her for lunch on the terrace. It felt strange, sitting at an elegant table, while the maid served chicken salad on fine china. But Vera made him feel at ease, treating him like a guest rather than the plumber. "So tell me, Brock," she said as they ate, "what made you decide to expand your business now?" Something in her tone, genuine interest without judgment, made Brock answer honestly. "My wife left me," he said, the words still painful to say aloud. "For her boss, a billionaire." Vera's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained kind. "I see. And becoming a contractor is your way of competing with this wealthy man?" "It started that way," Brock admitted. "But now, it's more about building something for myself, something I can be proud of, whether she comes back or not." Vera nodded thoughtfully. "May I tell you a story, Brock?" "Of course. When I was young, about your wife's age, I imagine, I was married to a kind man named Robert. He was a teacher. We had a simple life, but a good one." Vera gazed out at her manicured gardens. "Then I met Thomas Hollingsworth at a school fundraiser. He was charming, successful, and very persistent. He pursued me for months." Brock set down his fork, suddenly very interested. "I left Robert for Thomas," Vera continued. "Convinced myself I was in love, that I deserved the finer things Thomas could provide. My family was scandalized, but I didn't care. I was dazzled by my new life." "What happened?" Brock asked. "Reality happened." Vera smiled wryly. "The excitement wore off. I discovered that wealth comes with its own problems. Thomas's social circle was vicious. The women treated me like an intruder, the men like a trophy. I was miserable." "Did you go back to Robert?" "I did. And here's the remarkable part. He took me back." Vera's eyes grew distant with memory. "Not immediately. He made me earn his trust again. But he loved me enough to forgive me. We had 40 wonderful years together before he passed." Brock absorbed her story, hardly believing the parallels to his own situation. "What made you go back?" he asked. "I realized what really mattered," Vera said simply. "Robert valued me for myself, not as an accessory or a conquest. With him, I was a partner. With Thomas, I was a possession." They fell silent for a moment. Then Vera reached over and patted Brock's hand. "I don't know your wife, or the circumstances of your marriage. But I do know that true love is rare and worth fighting for. If both people want it." After lunch, as Brock presented his bill, Vera studied it with a shrewd eye. "You've undercharged me," she declared. "The going rate for this kind of work is at least 20% higher." "I charge what's fair," Brock said. "Fairness works both ways." Vera wrote a check for more than his asking price. "I value honest work, fairly done." As Brock thanked her and turned to leave, Vera said, "Oh, and Brock, I serve on several charity boards in the city. We're always looking for reliable contractors for our projects. Perhaps you could leave me some business cards when you have them." Driving away from Vera's mansion, Brock felt an unexpected lightness, not just from the generous check or the potential business connection, but from Vera's story. For the first time, he could imagine a future where Melody realized her mistake and came back, and a future where she didn't, but he still built a good life. 2 days later, a thank you card arrived from Vera, praising his work and inviting him to the annual charity gala she was hosting the following month. "The city's finest will be there," she wrote. "An excellent networking opportunity for your new venture." Brock stared at the invitation, remembering what Vera had said about her first husband. He made me earn his trust again. Maybe that was the key. Not competing with Parker's money, but showing Melody a different kind of value altogether. Melody sat in Parker's sleek sports car, watching the familiar neighborhoods of her old life flash by. After weeks of living in Parker's penthouse, everything about her former neighborhood seemed smaller, shabbier. Yet something about it still felt like home in a way the luxury penthouse never had. "You can just drop me off," she told Parker's driver. "I won't be long." She'd come to collect more clothes and personal items from the house she'd shared with Brock. Parker had offered to send his staff to pack everything, but Melody had refused. Some things she needed to do herself. As the car pulled away, Melody stood on the sidewalk looking at the small house with its slightly overgrown lawn. The mailbox was still crooked. She smiled sadly, remembering how she used to nag Brock about fixing it. Using her key, she let herself in, half expecting to find the place a mess. Instead, she was surprised to find it cleaner than when she'd left. The living room was tidy, dishes washed and put away, floors swept. No empty beer cans or takeout containers, signs of the depression she'd imagined Brock sinking into. More surprising were the changes. A stack of textbooks sat on the coffee table. Business fundamentals and construction management. A blueprint was spread out on the dining table alongside a notebook filled with Brock's neat handwriting. She glimpsed the words "Taylor Contracting and Renovation" at the top of a page. Melody ran her fingers over the blueprint, a design for what looked like a small office building. Was Brock planning to build this? When had he become interested? In construction? She made her way to the bedroom, noticing more changes. Brock's side of the closet was organized in a way it had never been before. His dresser top, usually cluttered with loose change and receipts, now held only a lamp and a framed photo of his parents. Melody began gathering her things, filling a suitcase with clothes she hadn't taken the first time. As she worked, she found herself pausing over small mementos. A seashell from their beach trip 3 years ago. A silly Valentine's card Brock had made by hand. A dried flower from their wedding bouquet. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by memories. Despite the luxury of her new life with Parker, she found herself missing the simplicity of her life with Brock. The comfortable silence of Sunday mornings reading the paper together. The way he always made her laugh when she was upset. The feeling of being truly known and accepted. With Parker, she always felt like she was performing, saying the right things, wearing the right clothes, being the right kind of girlfriend for a billionaire. The constant pressure was exhausting. The front door opened, startling Melody from her thoughts. "Hello?" Brock called out. "Melody? Your car's not outside, but the door was unlocked." "In here," she answered, quickly wiping her eyes. "I came to get some more things." Brock appeared in the bedroom doorway, looking different than she remembered. He seemed more confident somehow, standing straighter. He'd gotten a haircut, and his work clothes were freshly pressed. "Sorry," he said. "I thought you'd call first. I can come back later." "No, it's fine." Melody gestured at her half-packed suitcase. "I'm almost done." An awkward silence fell between them. "The house looks good," Melody finally said. "Very clean." Brock shrugged. "Made some changes, trying to be more organized these days." "I saw the books and blueprints. Are you really becoming a contractor?" "That's the plan." Brock leaned against the doorframe. "I've got my first real job next week. Renovating a bathroom for a client. Zach's overseeing it until I get my license." "That's "That's great, Brock." Melody meant it. "I didn't know you were interested in that kind of work. There's a lot we stopped talking about," Brock said, echoing their conversation at the diner. "I always liked the building part of plumbing jobs, figuring out how things fit together, creating something new." Melody nodded, remembering how he'd always lingered at construction sites, asking questions of the builders. She should have noticed his interest, but somehow she'd missed it. "How's life with Parker?" Brock asked, his voice carefully neutral. Melody hesitated. The honest answer was complicated. Parker's world was exciting, but alienating. She felt both privileged and out of place, valued for her appearance, but not her opinions. "It's different," she said finally. "His friends aren't very welcoming." "Rich people problems," Brock said with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I guess." Melody looked down at her hands, at the diamond bracelet that now felt like a shackle. "Parker wants us to go to his beach house next week, for the whole summer." "Sounds nice," Brock said, though his expression tightened. "Better than sweating through July in the city." "I haven't decided if I'm going," Melody admitted. "It feels so permanent, like I'm committing to that life." "Aren't you already?" Brock asked. "Living with him, I mean." The simple question cut through Melody's confusion. Was she just delaying the inevitable? Or was her hesitation a sign that she'd made the wrong choice? Before she could answer, Brock's phone chimed with a text. He glanced at it. "I've got to go," he said. "Meeting with a potential client." As he turned to leave, Melody noticed an elegant cream-colored card on his dresser. She picked it up. "Annual Charity Gala, hosted by Vera Hollingsworth?" "Oh, that." Brock looked slightly embarrassed. "She's a client, fixed her bathroom plumbing. She invited me to some fancy charity thing." "Vera Hollingsworth? Of the Hollingsworth Foundation?" Melody was stunned. "Parker's been trying to get an invitation to her events for months. She's on every important board in the city." "She's just a nice old lady who overtips," Brock said with a shrug. "Left me that thank you note, too." Melody picked up the handwritten card beside the invitation. "Your honest work and integrity are refreshing, Mr. Taylor. I look forward to introducing you to my circle." Something shifted in Melody's perception. While Parker schemed to enter high society, Brock had earned his way in through simple hard work and honesty. "Will you go?" she asked, setting down the card. "Probably." "Good for business," Vera says. Brock checked his watch. "I really need to go? Lock up when you leave?" After he was gone, Melody sat in the quiet house, thinking. The man who had just left wasn't the same husband she'd walked out on weeks ago. This Brock was focused, confident, moving forward with his life, with or without her. For the first time, she wondered if she was the one being left behind. The Hollingsworth Foundation's annual charity gala was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the most exclusive venue in the city. As Brock handed his keys to the valet, he felt distinctly out of place among the arriving guests in their designer clothes and luxury cars. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Vera said, appearing beside him in an elegant navy gown. She'd insisted on meeting him outside rather than having him pick her up. "Relax, Brock. It's just a party. A party where I don't belong," Brock muttered, tugging at the collar of his borrowed suit. Zach had lent him his best one, but it was still off the rack and slightly too tight across the shoulders. "Nonsense," Vera replied, taking his arm. "You belong wherever you choose to be. Now, remember what we discussed. This isn't about fitting in. It's about making connections for your business." As they entered the grand ballroom, Brock tried to look confident, despite feeling like an imposter. The room glittered with crystal chandeliers, ornate floral arrangements, and jewels adorning the necks and wrists of the city's elite. "Vera, darling," a distinguished man with silver hair approached them. "The place looks magnificent." "Thank you, Charles. May I introduce Brock Taylor? He's starting a contracting business." "Brock, this is Charles Montgomery. He owns half the commercial real estate downtown." Brock shook the man's hand firmly. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." "A contractor?" Charles looked interested. "I've been looking for someone reliable for my smaller properties. The big firms only want the major projects." "I'd be happy to discuss your needs," Brock said, slipping into the relaxed professional tone he used with clients. "I believe in quality work at fair prices." "Refreshing attitude," Charles noted, pulling out a business card. "Call my office? Next week?" As Charles moved on, Vera gave Brock an approving nod. "Perfect. Direct and honest. That's what these people respect, not pretension." Throughout the evening, Vera introduced Brock to potential clients, each one more influential than the last. To his surprise, people seemed genuinely interested in his new business. Several exchanged cards, and one woman hired him on the spot to renovate her pool house. "You're a natural," Vera told him during a quiet moment. "You speak their language without even realizing it, the language of competence." Brock was about to respond when he noticed a stir near the entrance. Parker. Reed had arrived, commanding attention as he always did in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and beside him, looking breathtaking in a shimmering emerald gown, was Melody. Brock's heart clenched at the sight of her. Despite everything, she still took his breath away. "Ah," Vera said, following his gaze. "That must be your wife. She's lovely." "She is," Brock agreed quietly. "And the man beside her, Parker Reed, I presume?" "I've denied his foundation's requests for partnership 3 years running." Brock looked at her in surprise. "You know Parker?" "I know of him," Vera corrected. "His business practices don't align with my values. But he's persistent. I'll give him that." Across the room, Melody was scanning the crowd when her eyes landed on Brock. Her expression registered shock, then something harder to read. She leaned toward Parker, saying something that made him look in Brock's direction, his face darkening momentarily. "Shall we say hello?" Vera suggested. "I find awkward situations are best confronted directly." Before Brock could protest, Vera was steering him across the room toward Parker and Melody. As they approached, Brock noticed the strain behind Melody's smile, the possessive way Parker held her waist. "Mr. Reed," Vera said smoothly, "how nice of you to support our cause tonight." "Mrs. Hollingsworth." Parker's smile was practiced and perfect. "The Hollingsworth Foundation's work is admirable. I've been hoping to discuss potential collaboration between our organizations." "Indeed?" Vera raised an eyebrow. "How interesting. And who is your lovely companion?" "This is Melody Taylor, his assistant," Melody interjected, extending her hand to Vera. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Hollingsworth. Your foundation's education initiatives are remarkable." "Thank you, my dear." Vera took Melody's hand warmly. "And I believe you already know my guest, Brock Taylor." Parker's eyes narrowed as he looked at Brock. "You two are acquainted?" "Mr. Taylor did some excellent work on my home," Vera explained. "When I learned he was launching a contracting business, I thought he should meet potential clients." "A contractor?" Parker's tone was dismissive. "How? Hands-on." "I've always believed in the dignity of creating something tangible," Vera replied, her voice steel beneath silk. "My late husband built his empire from nothing but honest labor and vision." Melody was staring at Brock, clearly trying to reconcile the confident man before her. comfortably conversing with one of the city's most influential women, with the husband she'd left behind. "Brock is renovating my pool house this spring," Vera continued. After his impressive work on the Montgomery's guest bathroom, Charles was just singing his praises. Parker's expression tightened. He'd been trying to get Charles Montgomery's business for years. "How nice," he said flatly. "Oh, plumber who can also tile bathrooms. The American dream." The condescension in his voice hung in the air. Brock saw Melody flinch slightly. "Actually," Brock said, his voice calm, "I'm developing a specialty in sustainable building practices, incorporating recycled materials and energy-efficient designs." "Sustainability is the future of construction," Vera added. Brock's ideas about integrating green technology into historic renovations are quite innovative. Melody looked at Brock with new eyes. "You never mentioned being interested in sustainable building." "A lot has changed," Brock replied simply. 828's uncomfortable silence followed, broken when a server approached with champagne. Parker took 2 glasses, handing one to Melody without asking if she wanted it. "If you'll excuse us," Parker said, "we should greet the mayor. Mrs. Hollingsworth, perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss that collaboration." "My assistant will be in touch," Vera said non-committally. "Enjoy your evening." As Parker guided Melody away, she glanced back at Brock one more time, her expression troubled. "Well," Vera said once they were out of earshot, "I see what you're up against. The man has all the warmth of a calculator." "He has billions of dollars," Brock pointed out, "and not an ounce of the character you displayed by not punching him when he insulted your profession." Vera patted his arm. "Your wife noticed that, by the way." Later, as Vera was deep in conversation with a museum director, Brock took a moment alone on the terrace. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the crowded ballroom. "I didn't know you'd be here," Melody's voice came from behind him. Brock turned to see her standing in the doorway, the emerald of her dress catching the moonlight. "Vera invited me," he said. "Business networking." Melody stepped closer. "You seem different. More, I don't know. Confident," Brock suggested. "Yes, like you know exactly who you are." She looked out at the city lights. "You never told me about your interest in sustainable building. You never asked." The words came out harsher than he intended. "Sorry, that wasn't fair." "No, it was," Melody admitted. "I stopped asking about your dreams a long time ago. I was so focused on what we didn't have that I missed what we did." The honesty in her voice caught Brock off guard. Before he could respond, Parker appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said to Melody, his tone sharp. "The Andersons are asking about you." He nodded curtly at Brock, then steered Melody back inside with a hand on her back. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Brock found himself actually enjoying the event, especially when Vera publicly acknowledged him during her speech, praising his work and commitment to sustainability. "Sustainable practices aren't just good for the planet," she told the crowd. "They're good business, which is why I'm announcing tonight that the Hollingsworth Foundation will be funding a new initiative to incorporate green technology into commercial renovations, with Taylor Contracting as our primary partner." The room erupted in applause. Brock stood in shock as Vera beckoned him to join her on the small stage. As he made his way forward, he caught sight of Melody's face in the crowd. Proud, confused, and something else he couldn't quite read. Parker stood beside her, his expression thunderous. Vera had just announced a major initiative without including his company, instead partnering with her plumber. "I should have mentioned this earlier," Vera whispered, as Brock joined her on stage. "But I wanted to see Reed's face when I announced it." After the speech, As guests began to depart, Parker confronted Vera near the coat check, his voice low but intense. That initiative should have been a joint venture with Future Tech. We've been discussing potential partnerships for months. Have we? Vera replied coolly. I recall receiving proposals, but no discussions. Besides, I prefer working with people whose values align with mine. And a plumber's values align better than mine? Parker's mask of charm had slipped completely. Contractor who understands integrity. Yes. Vera's voice was firm. Good evening, Mr. Reed. As Parker stormed off to retrieve his and Melody's coats, Melody approached Brock one last time. Congratulations on the partnership, she said softly. You deserve it. Thank you, Brock replied. He wanted to say more, to ask her to come home, to tell her he still loved her. But something held him back. Pride, perhaps. Or the knowledge that she needed to make her own choice, without pressure. I should go, Melody said, glancing toward Parker, who was impatiently holding her coat. But, Brock, I'm happy for you. Really. As she walked away, Brock felt Vera beside him. You did well tonight, the older woman said. Both with the networking and with her. I didn't do anything with her, Brock said. Exactly. Vera smiled, knowingly. Sometimes doing nothing is the hardest and most effective thing of all. The morning after the gala, Melody sat on the edge of Parker's bed, watching him pace the penthouse in barely controlled fury. He hadn't stopped ranting since they'd returned last night. That old witch, he fumed. 3 years I've been courting. The Hollingsworth Foundation? 3 years? And she gives her environmental initiative to a plumber? Contractor, Melody corrected quietly. Brock is becoming a contractor. Parker shot her an irritated look. Don't defend him. The man fixes toilets for a living and apparently designs sustainable building projects, Melody countered, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. You heard what Vera said. His ideas impressed her. Please. Parker waved dismissively. She was just trying to spite me, using your husband as a pawn. Melody considered this. She'd been shocked to see Brock at the gala, looking so at ease among the city's elite. The Brock she'd married had always been uncomfortable at fancy events, preferring small gatherings with close friends. But last night, he'd seemed transformed, confident, articulate, moving through the crowd with purpose. And the way he'd handled Parker's condescension with dignity rather than anger had impressed her more than she wanted to admit. I'm going to take a shower, Parker announced, still scowling. We leave for the Hamptons tomorrow. Make sure you're packed. As the bathroom door closed behind him, Melody stared out at the city skyline. The Hamptons. Parker had been pressuring her about the summer house for weeks, insisting it would be the perfect escape. Away from the city, away from reminders of Brock, away from her growing doubts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, her former co-worker and one of the few friends who hadn't judged her for leaving Brock. How was the gala? Did Parker get his meeting with the Hollingsworth woman? Melody smiled wryly as she typed back, Not exactly. Turns out Brock is working with her now. You should have seen Parker's face. Lisa's response was immediate. What? You're Brock? The plumber? How did that happen? Long story. But he's not just a plumber anymore. He's starting his own contracting business, specializing in sustainable building. Wow. Good for him. How did it feel seeing him? Melody stared at the question. How had it felt? Confusing. Painful. But also something else. Pride? Regret? She wasn't sure. Complicated, she finally replied. He seems different. More confident. And Parker? How's life in billionaire land? Melody glanced toward the bathroom where she could hear the shower running. Honestly, not what I expected. Before she could elaborate, Parker emerged from the bathroom, a towel around his waist. "Who are you texting?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "Just Lisa," Melody answered, setting her phone down. "About what?" "The gala. Girl talk." Parker nodded, but Melody didn't miss how his eyes lingered on her phone. He'd been doing that more lately, checking who she was talking to, questioning her movements. At first, she'd found his attentiveness flattering. Now it felt suffocating. "I thought I'd go by the house this morning," she said. "Pick up the last of my winter clothes before we leave." "I can send someone," Parker offered, opening his closet, to reveal rows of immaculate suits. "I'd rather go myself," Melody insisted. "There are some personal things I want to sort through." Parker frowned. "You've been sorting through things a lot lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" "Of course not," Melody said quickly. "It's just, packing up a marriage takes time." "It's been weeks, Melody. At some point, you need to commit to moving forward with me." His words hung between them, an ultimatum wrapped in concern. "I know," she said softly, "and I will. I just need to do this my way." An hour later, Melody stood once again outside her old house. She'd told herself she was just coming for winter clothes, but deep down she knew she was looking for something else. Clarity, perhaps, or closure. The house was empty, Brock's truck nowhere in sight. Using her key, she entered one last time. The changes she'd noticed on her previous visit had continued. New paint on the living room walls, a desk in the corner with a computer and neatly arranged papers, a bookshelf filled with business and design books. In the bedroom, Melody began gathering the last of her things. As she reached into the back of the closet, her hand touched a small box she'd forgotten about. Opening it, she found mementos of their relationship, movie ticket stubs from their first date, the card Brock had written when he proposed, photos from happier times. Sitting on the floor, surrounded by these pieces of their past, Melody felt tears begin to fall. What had happened to them? How had they drifted so far apart that she'd fallen into another man's arms? The front door opened, startling her. "Hello?" Brock called out. "In here," Melody answered, quickly wiping her eyes. Brock appeared in the doorway, looking surprised. "I didn't know you were coming by today." "Last-minute decision," she explained. "Parker and I are leaving for the Hamptons tomorrow. I needed my winter things." "Right, the Hamptons." Brock nodded, his expression neutral. "For the whole summer, you said?" "That's the plan." An awkward silence fell between them as Brock noticed the memory box open beside her, the photos spread across the floor. "I'd forgotten about these," Melody said softly, holding up a photo from their honeymoon, both of them laughing on a beach, young and hopelessly in love. Brock knelt down, picking up another photo. "Me too." For a moment, they were both lost in memories. Then Brock stood, his decision clear in his eyes. "Melody," he said quietly, "are you happy with him?" The simple question cut through weeks of confusion and conflict. Melody opened her mouth to give the automatic answer. Of course she was happy. Parker gave her everything she'd ever wanted. But the words wouldn't come. "I don't know," she admitted instead. "Sometimes, when we're alone. But his world is so cold. Everyone wears masks, including me." Brock nodded slowly. "You never had to wear a mask with me." "No," Melody whispered. "I didn't." Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else fell away. Parker, the affair, the pain of separation. There was just Brock and Melody, two people who had once promised to love each other forever. But the moment passed, and reality returned. Melody carefully placed the photos back in the box. "I should go," she said, rising to her feet. "Parker will be waiting." As she gathered her things, Brock didn't try to stop her, didn't beg her to stay. His silence spoke volumes about how much had changed between them. At the door, Melody turned back one last time. "The house looks good. You've done a lot with it." "I sold it," Brock said simply. "Closing is next week." "You sold our house?" Melody felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. "Why?" "Fresh start," Brock replied. "I've bought a place on the coast, small but right on the water. Room to grow." "The coast? You're moving away?" "It's time," Brock said, "for both of us." As Melody walked to her car, the finality of his words echoed in her mind. He was moving. On? Truly, moving on. The realization hit her with unexpected force. She'd been so focused on choosing between Brock and Parker that she'd never considered a third possibility, that Brock might choose to let her go. "We need to talk," Melody said, standing in the doorway of Parker's home office. He glanced up from his laptop with an impatient expression. "Can it wait? I'm finalizing the details for our Hamptons trip." "No," Melody replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It can't wait." Something in her tone made Parker look at her more carefully. He closed his laptop. "What's wrong?" "I'm not going to the Hamptons with you," Melody said. "I need some time to think. Alone." Parker's face darkened. "This is about seeing your husband at the gala, isn't it?" "It's about a lot of things," Melody admitted. "Seeing Brock was part of it, but it's more than that. I rushed into this relationship without really ending my marriage. I need space to figure out what I truly want." "What you want?" Parker stood, his voice tight with control. "I've given you everything you could possibly want. A new life, luxury, opportunity. What more could there be?" "Respect," Melody said quietly. "Equality. The freedom to be myself without constantly performing." Parker stared at her as if she'd started speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand." "I know," Melody said sadly. "That's part of the problem." She'd packed a small bag before this conversation, knowing how it might end. Now she picked it up from where she'd left it by the door. "Where are you going?" Parker demanded. "A hotel for now," Melody answered. "I'll be in touch about getting the rest of my things." As she turned to leave, Parker called after her, "He won't take you back, you know. Not after everything." Melody paused, but didn't turn around. "This isn't about him taking me back. It's about me finding my way forward, whatever that looks like." 3 days later, after checking out of her hotel, Melody stood on a sidewalk in a small coastal town 2 hours from the city. According to the neighbors she'd spoken to, this was where Brock had moved. The address led her to a beachfront property under construction, a small resort being renovated by the looks of it. Workers moved purposefully around the site, carrying lumber and tools. In the center of it all stood Brock, reviewing blueprints with a contractor Melody recognized as his friend Zach. Gathering her courage, Melody approached. Brock looked up, his surprise quickly masked by that new calm confidence she was still getting used to. "Melody," he said simply. "This is unexpected." "I know. I'm sorry for just showing up." She glanced around at the busy construction site. "Your neighbor told me I could find you here," Brock nodded. "Want a tour?" As they walked through the partially renovated property, Brock explained his vision. It was a small family resort built in the 70s, been vacant for years. Got it for a good price because of the condition, but the location is perfect. It's beautiful, Melody said sincerely, taking in the ocean view. But it's a huge project. Vera helped with the financing, Brock explained. She liked my business plan, said it reminded her of how her husband started. They stopped at the edge of a wooden deck overlooking the beach. The sun was beginning to set, painting the water in golds and oranges. Brock, I need to tell you something, Melody said, turning to face him. I didn't go to the Hamptons with Parker. I ended things. Brock's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Melody searched his face. Because I'm not. Being with him made me realize what really matters. What I almost threw away. She took a deep breath. I know I hurt you terribly. I know I betrayed our vows and broke your trust. But if there's any chance at all, that we could try again? Brock looked out at the ocean, his profile etched against the setting sun. It's not that simple, Melody. I know, she whispered, her hope faltering. I understand if you can't forgive me. It's not about forgiveness, Brock said. I forgave you weeks ago. Before Melody could respond, a woman's voice called from the main building. Brock? The supplier's on the phone about the reclaimed wood. Melody turned to see a striking woman with long, dark hair walking toward them. She was casually dressed, in jeans and a t-shirt, but moved with natural grace. Coming, Nora, Brock called back. Melody felt her heart sink. Of course he'd met someone else, someone beautiful, and clearly involved in his new venture. The woman named Nora approached, smiling warmly at Melody. Sorry to interrupt. You must be Melody. I'm Nora. Nice to meet you, Melody managed, fighting back tears as Nora took Brock's hand. The wood supplier says they can get us the reclaimed oak, but it'll delay the delivery by a week, Nora explained to Brock. Do we have that flexibility in the schedule? We can make it work, Brock replied. The sustainability aspect is worth the wait. Nora nodded, then turned to Melody. Has Brock shown you the whole property yet? The main house has the most incredible potential. The original woodwork is hidden under decades of paint, but we're restoring it all. We? Melody asked quietly. Nora's an artist, Brock explained. She's helping with the design elements. Her grandmother introduced us. Grandmother? Melody looked between them, confused. Vera, Nora clarified with a smile. She thought Brock and I would make good business partners. She was right, as usual. Relief washed over Melody so intensely she nearly swayed on her feet. Your business partners? Of course, Nora said, looking slightly confused. What did you think? Oh. Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. She laughed and released Brock's hand. No. Brock and I aren't together. I'm engaged to a marine biologist who's currently doing research in Australia. And besides, Brock's heart is very much spoken for, isn't it? With a knowing smile at both of them, Nora excused herself and headed back to the main building. Alone. Again, Melody turned to Brock. I know what you thought, Brock said softly. You said it wasn't simple, Melody reminded him. If not because of someone else, then why? Brock reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Because of this. Melody took the paper, opening it to find legal paperwork for the resort. Her eyes scanned the document, stopping at the ownership details. Taylor and Taylor Resorts, LLC. I don't understand, she said, looking up at Brock. Look at the names on the paperwork, he urged gently. Her eyes returned to the document. Brock Taylor and Melody Taylor, equal partners. I never gave up on us, Melody, Brock said quietly. Even when you left. Even when I thought I might lose. You forever. I was building this for both of us." Tears filled Melody's eyes as understanding dawned. "The resort's name?" "Second Chances," Brock confirmed. "Because that's what I believe in." "But why?" Melody asked, overwhelmed. "After what?" "I did. Because love isn't about keeping score," Brock said simply. "It's about building something that lasts, even when it seems impossible." He took her hands in his. "I'm not competing with Parker's money. I never was. I'm offering something he can't. A partnership of equals. A chance to build something together. A real home." Melody looked from the paperwork to the determination in Brock's eyes, finally understanding what he had done. While she'd been dazzled by Parker's wealth, Brock had been quietly creating a future where they could work side by side, equals in every way. "So what happens now?" she whispered. "That depends," Brock said. "Are you ready to be my partner? Ethimans, business and in life? Because I'm offering both or neither." Melody looked out at the ocean, then back at the man she'd nearly lost. The man who had loved her enough to create a second chance when most would have walked away. The choice she'd been struggling with for weeks suddenly became the easiest decision she'd ever made. That was the end of this story. Where are you listening from today? If you enjoyed Brock and Melody's journey, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories like this one. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family to spread kindness and awareness. Your support helps us continue creating content that entertains and inspires. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.